Let us pray together. Holy Jesus, you sent many into the world to proclaim your kingdom on earth. Send us, equip us, and walk with us so that everyone can learn of your abundance. Amen. So, Brenda did an amazing job last week in coming up here and preaching about us getting lifted up out of the holes in our lives. And so we moved away from the narrative lectionary last week, and so we missed Mark 5. And in Mark 5, you get these two healing stories, one that's put right into the middle of another one. Jesus is on his way to heal Jairus' daughter, and on his way, crowds rush upon him, and a woman reaches out and touches his cloak, and she is healed. And he stops the crowds and says, "Who is it that touched me?" We know the story, right? And he finds her and says that your faith has healed you. And then Jairus hears that his daughter is dead in the midst of all this, and Jesus says she's not dead, she's just sleeping. And goes and tell her little girl, "Get up." And she comes out to him. So we just have these healing stories building around Jesus. And then we get our text today where Jesus goes to his hometown. And what do they say to him? They say, "Welcome home. We're so glad to see you." They say, "Aren't you that carpenter's son? You can't be doing these things." There's a story that goes that rejection comes in all forms. It's a story about a man named Michael. He was a young man and he felt the call of God on his life. And he came from a really close family. He finished college. He went off to seminary. And after finishing seminary, he comes back to his church, his home church. And he visited with his relatives for about a week. And he stopped by the church and he talked to his hometown pastor just to say, "Hey, I'm done and I'm home. I just wanted to check in." And the pastor said, "It's so great that you're here. Why don't you preach this Sunday?" And he felt honored, and he took the pastor up on the invitation. So Sunday morning came, and after hours, yes, even days, and I'm sure years of thinking about having the opportunity to preach in his home church, after all this preparation, he steps up behind the pulpit, and he looks out at the congregation of mainly friends and relatives, and he starts to expound upon all this knowledge that he had learned in his time at seminary. What happens is that his young niece Kathleen is out there listening. She's only about 6 years old, and she's listened long enough. She steps into the aisle, she puts her hands on her hips, and she points up at Michael and says, "Uncle Michael, you don't know what you're talking about." Rejection. Rejection is hard to handle from anybody. From your own family, your own friends, your own community. It had to have been so difficult. Our journey through Mark continues with Jesus being rejected in his hometown. And his response to this rejection is to then immediately teach his disciples how they must go and spread the good news of God. What it will be like for them, how they should prepare for it, and then he sends them off. And after he sends them off, the author of Mark decides to tell us what happened to John the Baptist, about him being killed over a request from Herod Antipas's daughter on his birthday. When I read this text, originally I saw like three main characters, but more I see like the intertwining of two groups of characters. You have Jesus and the disciples, and you have Herod and kind of John. I mean, John the Baptist is a big name, and his role has a big impact, but he himself isn't doing too much in this text. And so I wonder, when I read this and with this pairing, I wonder, where does this text speak to us? Let's begin with Herod. In our text we read, "For Herod himself had sent men who arrested John, bound him, put him in prison on account of Herodias, his brother Philip's wife, because Herod had married her. For John had been telling Herod, 'It is not lawful for you to have your brother's wife,' and Herodias had a grudge against him and wanted to kill him, but she could not. For Herod feared John. Knowing that he was a righteous and holy man, he protected him. When he heard him, he was greatly perplexed, and yet he liked to listen to him." Herod knew that John was a man of God. And yet, he became torn by wanting to keep his image after he told his daughter she could ask for anything. He needed to keep his word in front of his party guests in his mind. Karen Just writes on how this impacts us, how we have these Herod-like personal and spiritual dilemmas. Daily life also presents a series of Herod-like personal and spiritual dilemmas for persons to negotiate. For a harried mother of a toddler, there is the question of how best to love and parent a child in the face of a defiant no and a full-fledged temper tantrum in aisle 6 of the grocery store at the end of a long day. For a father of 3, it is the struggle to explain the importance of rearranging travel plans for a work trip so he can attend a Little League playoff game. A corporate executive wonders how her announcement of a long-awaited pregnancy will affect her employees' perceptions of her as an effective boss. A stay-at-home dad wrestles with the whispers of former colleagues that he just couldn't handle the pressures of work. Teenagers experience the angst of competing for acceptance in desirable social cliques, of serial broken hearts in the complex world of adolescent dating, of familial tensions over privileges and responsibilities. Younger children long for popular toys advertised on television, worry about parental fights and potential or actual breakup of their families, and wonder if the trouble they have learning multiplication tables or basic grammar means they are stupid. This text speaks to me this week as a pastor, worries about the pain, the stress, the breaking of relationships, moving from one call to another, and prays for transitions to be as smooth as possible for the congregation, as the pastor worries about the reactions, the fear, the anger, the rejection that might be felt. See, across the lifespan, across our lifespans, people question who they are and how we should act as life pushes and pulls us in conflicting directions. And as in the story of Herod's struggle, there are lives at stake when we decide which actions we will take. We all have moments like Herod, and we have to make difficult decisions. And sometimes those decisions are between what others will think about us and what God calls from us. Sometimes the most difficult decisions in our lives is to follow God. This past week, we heard a world leader speak at a prayer breakfast about how people shouldn't follow their faiths. So many other leaders applauded him in this. It would be easier to fall in line, but Christ calls us to be more. Even Jesus ran into difficulties in following his call. If anyone should be welcomed by those who know and love him, you would think it would be Jesus. But we see how he is rejected in his own town. And so he moves on and proclaims the good news to anyone else who will listen. This is comforting for us. I think we hear this story because it's meant to be comforting for us. For when we run into difficult times, even Jesus came through those times. He calls for our help in bringing the news of love, joy, peace, forgiveness, and acceptance to all. Even when we are rejected by our communities, or by our political parties, or by our Facebook groups, or by our families, if we are following Christ's call to serve all, to spread the good news to the ends of the earth, we know we are making the right choice and not falling into Herod's folly. Mark Brunner writes that when he grew up, he believed that all cats were sneaky and couldn't be trusted, and that all dogs were rather dumb and couldn't be devious even if they tried. It was just something that he had picked up and learned as truth. There was little of any empirical information at his disposal. It was just something that he believed growing up. And when he was in college, he moved into a lower flat where dogs were not allowed but cats were, and he wanted a pet. So he went to the local shelter and he discovered Jussie Pushkin, a large Manx cat waiting to be adopted. And so he did. And it was neither sneaky nor not to be trusted. In fact, it acted more like a dog, a slight bit dense, but always trustworthy. These are his words. I don't feel that way about dogs. I love dogs. Years later, He and his wife, they acquired a mini dachshund. Anything but dumb and often untrustworthy, it acted more like a cat than a dog. However, even after years of evidence, he realized that he still believed that as a group, cats are devious and dogs are trustworthy. And he believed it because, he guesses, it was a notion that he wanted to believe. For centuries, for hundreds of years, people believed that Aristotle was right when he said that the heavier an object is, the faster it would fall to earth. And Aristotle was regarded as the greatest thinker of all time, and surely he would not be wrong. Anyone, of course, over the course of 100+ years, anyone could have taken two objects, one heavy and one light, and dropped them from a great height to see whether or not the heavier object landed first. But no one did until nearly 2,000 years later, after Aristotle's death. In 1589, Galileo summoned professors to the base of the Leaning Tower of Pisa, and he went to the top and he pushed off a 10-pound and a 1-pound weight. Both landed at the same instant. The power of belief was so strong that the professors who were there that saw this, they denied their eyesight, and they continued to teach and write that Aristotle was correct. Sometimes we are so blinded to the truth that even when presented with the evidence, we refuse to believe otherwise. Some cats are sneaky, while others aren't. Some dogs are trustworthy, and others not. When Jesus preached to his hometown, they heard his words, they saw his miracles, but since they knew who he was. He was the son of the carpenter, and a carpenter's son does not speak like this, does not perform miracles like this, does not heal Jairus' daughter, does not stop the woman who was hemorrhaging from bleeding. He could not be the Son of God that he claimed to be. Their preconceived notions about him were enough to blind them to the truth of what was presented before them. If we still do this, if we believe things about people just because we happen to believe a notion of them, or define them by a group with which they associate rather than the truth, we are no better. It is so easy to hide from the truth and our prejudices and our judgments. And so Jesus experiences this. And his reaction is to teach us to go and to do the work of the kingdom, knowing that we too will run into these prejudices, knowing that we too will have to overcome our prejudices. After Jesus is rejected by his hometown, he still cleanses and heals. We read, he called the 12 and began to send them out 2 by 2 and gave them authority over the unclean spirits. He ordered them to take nothing for their journey except a staff, no bread, no bag, no money in their belts, but to wear sandals and not to put on 2 tunics. He said to them, wherever you enter a house, stay there until you leave the place. If any place will not welcome you and they refuse to hear you as you leave, shake off the dust that is on your feet as a testimony against them. So they went out and proclaimed that all should repent. They cast out many demons and anointed with oil many who were sick and cured them. Are we following in his footsteps and his words? Are we stepping up to serve in the ways we can? I know it can be easy to sit back, to rest, and to give up when things get difficult. But immediately after being rejected, Jesus continues to serve and save and then sends his followers to do the hard work of seeking, sharing, and serving. We have opportunities to do this. We have the fish dinners, and we need people to help lead and serve. We have food for home, and we need people to help lead and serve. We have Mat 1128, and we need people to help lead and serve. We have Impact Massillon, and we need people to help lead and serve. We have Church World Service, Week of Compassion, our Haiti partnership, so much more, where we need people to lead and serve. And we always need people to give. Jesus challenges his followers in such a difficult time. Not only did they just witness him being rejected by his hometown, but they now know what's in store for them, for truth tellers. And then the author of Mark puts in this story about John's beheading, so that we know that they, as they go out, know what happens to truth tellers. They know what happened to John the Baptist. And they still go. They still give their all in service to God. We have difficult choices to make, but I pray we follow Christ's call in our lives to seek, share, and serve generously in the ways in which we are called and able. Amen.